Welcome to the Little Sparks Podcast, your home for all things faith and music. I'm Cecilia.
And I'm Tara.
And we're former college roommates, professional musicians, and co-founders of the Hildegard Collective, a space for Catholic musicians to connect with one another and grow in their faith and profession. This podcast is an outreach of the collective, so if you're interested at all in Catholicism, music, or both, this is the podcast for you. Join us each week as we get real, share stories, and learn from other awesome Catholic musicians. We're all little sparks of God's divine creation, so together, let's ignite the world for Christ. Welcome back to another episode of the Little Sparks Podcast. We are super excited. Today we are going to be doing our seasonal saint feature, and today we will be talking about St. John Henry Newman, who is our newest doctor of the church, was just declared on November 1st, All Saints Day. He is a wonderful, wonderful saint, a convert from Anglicanism in the 19th century, had a real heart for the university system and college ministry. And he also had an affinity for music. It was a very important part of his life. And as Tara just informed me right before we started recording, he played the violin. So that's super cool. That our newest doctor of the church had such a deep love for music and such a special place in his life for it. So Tara knows a lot about St. John Henry Newman. You want to just start talking about him and just what's the most important things to know about him?
Yeah, I love St. John Henry Newman. I'm super fortunate to attend his parish that he actually founded and built here in Dublin during his time here. Yeah, it's super cool. And it is just filled with personal and like liturgical history all about John Henry Newman. And a lot of the parish community were actually able to go on All Saints Day to Rome to hear him declared a doctor of the church, which is so cool. And I wish that we could have been part of that little group that went, but everybody had an amazing time, which is great. And yeah, John Henry Newman, as Cecilia mentioned, he started playing violin when he was 10 years old. And everybody kind of thinks of him, maybe rightly so, as just being very academic in nature. And he has incredible prolific writings on a whole breadth of topics relating to theology. He was incredibly, incredibly intelligent. And yet music played a really important role in his life for his entire life. From the time he picked up a violin at the age of 10, music was really, really important to him. So I've actually pulled up some quotes of his about music and the role that it had on his life, and as well some a sermon of his where he talks about music and the mind of God. And it's actually he has some incredible things to say in that sermon. So I'm going to read an excerpt from that. But I wanted to start off on a bit more of a personal note, talking about his own personal journey with music and how important it was to him. I have here some quotes of his from personal letters that he wrote to friends. In 1865, he was actually gifted a violin by two of his friends, and he wrote these letters. Yeah, and he wrote these letters to thank them for this gift. And so I have two quotes. Sweet. Yeah, so I have two quotes from these letters here. The first one, he says, "I only fear that I may give time to it more than I ought to spare. I could find solace in music from week to week's end." So it's just so evident from the way he writes about it how important music was to him and how he found it to be so incredibly calming and something very peaceful and something that he kind of depended on for his own kind of personal growth and demeanor, I suppose, just his own peace and his heart. And then the second quote says, "I really think it will add to my power of working and the length of my life. I never wrote more than when I played the fiddle. I always sleep better after music. There must be some electric current passing from the strings through the fingers into the brain and down the spinal marrow. Perhaps thought is music."
Ooh, that is
Yeah.
profound right there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so that one ends on like quite a profound note, as he says, perhaps thought is music. Now, I don't think he expounded upon that anymore in that letter anyway. I think that was just kind of a half-baked thought that he had in this personal letter to a friend. Um, but again, he talks about sleeping better and just feeling more peaceful and more himself, maybe writing
Mhm.
better after he played music. And so he clearly thought a lot about the impact that music had on him. And it was something that remained important throughout his entire life.
That's just so beautiful. I love that.
Yeah,
That's
it's
really
really, really
awesome.
cool.
Um, I feel like the way that he describes playing his instrument, like a lot of musicians have felt that, that
Hmm.
very similar feeling. Like, um, I would hesitate to call it a universal feeling because I'm sure that there are people who have played instruments who are just like, oh, this really just isn't for me. But anyone who loves their instrument, I feel like that is a very universal feeling among anybody who loves their instrument.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I am really glad that he seemed to only ever have very positive experiences of music because, as we know, sometimes historically and even into the modern day, those of us who choose to pursue music as a career can sometimes see the less attractive side of the industry and can experience some real kind of negativity and toxicity that unfortunately can sometimes permeate this particular field. And it seems like he never really had that experience. He only ever had a very, very positive experience with music from the earliest age all through his adult life as well. And so I think that really gave him a sort of clarity on music that
Mm, yeah,
that sometimes can get maybe muddied or distracted from by negative experiences, whether that is a
right.
teacher, a professor, maybe someone who you're competing against in, for a role or for a spot in an ensemble, whatever the case may be. I think sometimes that negativity can really distract us from that original love that many of us have felt towards music and towards our instruments. I think the fact that he seemed to never have those negative experiences, but only ever had a very positive experience and impression of music from the very beginning all the way through the very end of his life, he was able to kind of retain that clarity of purpose and clarity of intention. And that combined with his incredible theological and academic understanding of God, he was able to make some really, really profound points about music in some of his sermons and even in those personal letters.
Yeah, yeah. As you're, speaking about all of this, I wonder if part of why he was able to have such a positive association with the violin and with music is because it wasn't a career for him. It was something that he did purely for the love of it. Um, which not to say that every musician who does not pursue it as a career and is not doing it solely for the love of it and not, as well to earn their bread and butter, so to speak, is going to be able to stay away from any negativity within music because I mean I know I've heard many stories myself of people who took lessons, because they loved an instrument and then had a teacher that just really ruined everything for them, through just whether it was just being too hard on them or just having a toxic studio environment or whatever it might have been. So obviously, not everybody who does it just for the sake of it is going to have that positive experience, but I do wonder if part of why he had such a positive association with music and the violin is because he wasn't doing it
Mm-hmm.
for financial security or anything like that. Um, or even like, wasn't like he was playing competitively, it wasn't like he was like, out to win a spot in the local community orchestra or something like that.
Yeah.
Like it was just purely for like because he loved it, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely something to be said for that. Um, I suppose like everybody's journey with music and experience of music is so intensely personal. I don't think there's any way we can know that for sure until, please
Oh, for
God,
sure.
someday, we make it to heaven and we can ask him ourselves. but
Yeah.
um, but I do think that it's really cool to hear about his experience of music and his writings about music.
Oh, 100%. And I think it can be encouraging to all of us, fellow musicians, especially those of us who, do it for a living. And because sometimes there can be burnout or frustration or whatnot, like, that can seep in when you're trying to earn a living from music. And I think that his words can be inspirational and rejuvenating even.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about this sermon that I found of his. It's just an excerpt from a sermon that he delivered at Oxford. So I
Hmm.
think this was while he was still Anglican, this particular sermon. But it's incredibly profound. And this excerpt is kind of about music and the mind of God. It's very profound. It's a little bit of a longer excerpt, but I think it's well worth listening to. So bear with me here. I'm going to read out this excerpt and then we're going to talk about it a little bit.
Amazing.
So he says, the cogitative method, as it may be called, of one man is notoriously very different from that of another, of the lawyer from that of the soldier, of the rich from that of the poor. The territory of thought is portioned out in 100 different ways. Abstractions, generalizations, definitions, propositions, all are framed on distinct standards. And if this is found in matters of the world between man and man, surely much more must it exist between the ideas of men and the thoughts, ways, and works of God. One of the obvious instances of this contrariety is seen in the classifications we make on the subjects of the animal or vegetable kingdoms. Here, a very intelligible order has been observed by the Creator himself, still one of which we have not, after all, the key. We are obliged to frame one of our own, and when we apply it, we find that it will not exactly answer the divine idea of arrangement as it discovers itself to us. Mathematical science will afford us a more extended illustration of this distinction between supernatural and eternal laws and our attempts to represent them, that is, our economies. Various methods or calculi have been adopted to embody those immutable principles and dispositions of which the science treats. Yet, none of them carries out the lines of truth to their limit.
Hmm.
Let us take another instance of an outward and earthly form, or economy, under which great wonders unknown seem to be typified. I mean musical sounds, as they are exhibited most perfectly in instrumental harmony. There are 7 notes in the scale, make them 14, yet what a slender outfit for so vast an enterprise. What science brings so much out of so little? Out of what poor elements does some great master in it create his new world? Shall we say that all this exuberant inventiveness is a mere ingenuity or trick of art, like some game or fashion of the day, without reality, without meaning? We may do so, and then, perhaps, we shall also account the science of theology to be a matter of words. Yet, as there is a divinity in the theology of the Church, which those who feel cannot communicate, so is there also in the wonderful creation of sublimity and beauty of which I am speaking. To many men, the very names which the science employs are utterly incomprehensible. To speak of an idea or a subject seems to be fanciful or trifling. To speak of the views which it opens upon us to be childish extravagance. Yet, is it possible that the inexhaustible evolution and disposition of notes, so rich yet so simple, so intricate yet so regulated, so various yet so majestic, should be a mere sound which is gone and perishes? Can it be that those mysterious stirrings of the heart and keen emotions, and strange yearnings after we know not what, and awful impressions from which we know not whence, should be wrought in us by what is unsubstantial, and comes and goes, and begins and ends in itself? It is not so. It cannot be. No, they have escaped from some higher sphere. They are the outpourings of eternal harmony in the medium of created sound. They are echoes from our home. They are the voice of angels, or the Magnificat of saints, or the living laws of divine governance, or the divine attributes. Something are they besides themselves, which we cannot compass, which we cannot utter, though mortal men, and he perhaps not otherwise distinguished above his fellows, has the gift of eliciting them.
That is so profound.
Yeah.
So deep. There's so much to unpack there. Oh my gosh.
I know. That's like a mic drop moment if ever I've heard one. I mean,
Oh, 100%.
that is incredible, that reflection about music. It like
Yeah.
took my breath away when I read it.
Oh my gosh, yeah. You need to send me the link to that so that I can like read it again and again. And we'll post it in the show notes, of course, for anyone who wants to read it.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so where to start with this one?
Literally, that's what I was just thinking. I don't even know where to begin. There's just so, like I said, there's so much to unpack there, you know?
Yeah. Now, obviously, in the beginning, he's kind of talking a bit about the mind of God and the difference in kind of thought and reality between God and man. And he uses all these examples of like how God has created all this order and this beauty in our world. And it's something that we can't exactly figure out the classification system for. We can't necessarily put them into neat little boxes because there are always like exceptions and exemptions to these things.
Right.
And it just points to the fact that God has this divine understanding, this divine order, this divine harmony to our world that isn't really comprehensible to us fully in our humanity, you know, and illustrates that divide isn't exactly the right word, but the kind of gap between the intellect of man and the intellect of God. And I just love that he chose to illustrate this by talking about music and talking about how it must necessarily be infused with something divine to elicit the response that it does in the human heart and in the human mind.
Yeah.
The way that it calls us to God and to things that are higher and things that are above. And yet, you know, we can sort of understand like music theory, right? We can kind of understand like tuning and harmonies and things like that. We kind of know why certain notes are consonant and certain notes are dissonant, like when played together. But there aren't words to describe the like spark of divinity that is infused in this music. And he talks about how you know, these notes that we are so blessed to be able to play are you know, coming from the higher spheres. They come from something divine. And I love what he says here when he says, they are echoes from our home. They are the voice of angels, or the Magnificat of saints, or the living laws of divine governance, or the divine attributes. Like divine attributes is something that we've talked about a lot on this podcast, with like truth, beauty, and goodness being these three transcendentals, which reflect something of the person of God. And so the fact that he is directing us back to these attributes of God and attributes of heaven that he so clearly sees and experiences in music, I just think he has the most beautiful way of describing it, and of saying that, like, you know, in a way, it's a little bit different, the world that we live in now, because we have like streaming, right? But think about the time when he was writing this. If you wanted to hear a particular piece of music, you had to go hear it played.
Yeah,
And
they didn't have any of the recording technology at all, I don't think. Like the gramophone hadn't been invented at this point, right?
I actually don't know when the gramophone was invented, but
Fair enough.
regardless, like it wouldn't
Mm.
have been like widely accessible by any means. But so, you had to go hear these live performances of these pieces of music, and chances are you would go hear a particular piece of music like one time in your life for the average person, right? And
Right.
so, and even if you went and heard the same, like say you had a favorite symphony and you went and heard it performed like a couple times in your life, the nature of live performance is that it's going to be different every time. Every single time
Right.
you're going to hear different tonalities, different harmonies brought out, different dynamic markings. It's always going to sound different just
Oh yeah.
because it's live.
Um, I did look it up when the gramophone was invented, and it was not invented until 1877. And this sermon I noticed on the link that you sent me was 1843.
Mm-hmm.
So that is 34 years later. And even then, I mean, Thomas Edison invented the gramophone, but then it took a little while to get out into, production and for it to be accessible to even middle class Americans. I mean, at first, or not just
Yeah.
Americans, but, middle class people. I think, you would have had some upper class, getting their hands on it right away, but it took a while for it to trickle down into the market. Um, so yeah, I bet at the time of his writing, like that wasn't even a thought in anybody's minds that you would be able to listen to music that had been played in the past.
Yeah.
Um, in a sense, I almost find myself. Don't get me wrong, I'm very grateful for the ability to stream music. It adds a lot to my day, especially as a stay-at-home mom. I love being able to easily introduce my daughter to a wide variety of music. I think there is a huge benefit to that. But there is a little part of me that's almost jealous for the days gone by when streaming music wasn't an option and you had to listen to it live. I think a lot more people partook in music regularly in making
Mm-hmm.
it. Um, Primarily, I. think by singing, I mean, just think of all of the little ditties and folk songs that people had to work along to, or, just enjoy at the pub at night, or like the tavern, or, in their own homes. There We've lost a bit of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is there is a tragedy in that. And I wonder how some of that could be reclaimed naturally while also still recognizing and engaging with the benefits of streaming. I think that's
Yeah.
something we're wondering.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think it's really interesting that there's been a huge discussion, generally online, I would say, like amongst Catholics for the past several years. But I think it's something that Pope Leo has spoken a lot about is the influence of AI on our kind of online culture.
Mhm.
And not that this is exactly the same. However, I do think when you attend a live music performance, I think part of what Newman is referencing here is that you experience a bit of the divine in the human connection that happens between
Yes.
performer and audience. Because as we know, we're all made in the image and likeness of God. And whether, when you're watching somebody up on stage or in reverse, looking at somebody in the audience, making eye contact with someone, you're having a momentary experience of God in that person. And
Yeah.
especially when you are doing something that is as vulnerable as performing can be, there's like almost a layer that's stripped back between yourself and that person. There's almost a bearing of your heart or a bearing of your soul,
Yeah.
not in a dangerous way, but you're sharing something that's so personal and vulnerable. And it's a way in that moment that you're nearly both reaching out to each other in your hearts to experience a moment of God together, even though you might not know each other's names or, know anything about each other.
Or even
And
recognize that spark of the divine, like.
yeah, absolutely. I think like it's so subconscious. It's something that happens so internally in our hearts and our souls that like often I think we're not even aware of it. Even myself, right? Like I can
Mhm.
sit here right now on this podcast and explain this to you verbally, but if you put me up on stage, I'm going to be so distracted thinking about like, oh, what's my next entrance? And am I going to hit that note? And, that it's not
Oh,
something that I'm going to
yeah.
be consciously thinking of like having or providing that experience for somebody sitting in the audience, but it does happen. We know that it happens. I've
Yeah.
experienced it from both the perspective of a performer and as an audience member as well.
Right,
And
right.
I think, in a completely different way, when you're streaming a piece of music, that connection isn't happening. There's a computer or a phone, some piece of technology that
Right.
is a barrier, quite a big barrier between the performer and the listener.
Yeah.
And so I think part of the profoundness of these revelations from Newman has to do with the fact that he only ever experienced live music and live performance, and he clearly
Yeah.
was incredibly moved by the experience and was constantly being directed and pointed back towards God in the beauty that he was experiencing in these
Yeah.
performances.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, I'm just thinking more about streaming, and I think you're spot on in general with that. That spark of the divine is quite lost because of that aspect of impersonal technology. I do think that you can get a little bit of a glimmer with it sometimes. I especially find that when I'm listening to a piece of music for the first time, I'll catch a glimmer of that. If I listen to it subsequent times, the more and more I listen to it, I feel like it gets more and more lost. Um, I don't know. I think we take for granted how easily accessible music is today and
Mm-hmm.
how we're able to just, press a button and listen. We can listen to a song on repeat. I remember my younger sister during the COVID lockdowns was super obsessed with this singer named Johnny Orlando, and he released some song during the COVID lockdowns, and she listened to it 106 times in one day, to the
In
point
one
where
day.
in one day, to the point where I'm pretty sure, because as an artist, you can see your own stats on the back end of your Spotify dashboard. And I am 99% sure that he posted something on Instagram asking if the person who listened to his song like 106 times in a row was okay or something like that. I might be getting the story a little bit wrong. Um, but like you know what I mean? Like there like it's a humorous example, but there you do lose a little bit of that when you listen to something so many times.
Mm-hmm.
On the contrary, I find there is something very special when you listen to someone's music, especially when they've just released it for the first time. Like whenever Cody Fry releases a new song, I really love him and his music. Whenever he releases a new song or a new cover, I stop what I'm doing and like make sure I have the space to actually listen to it, because I know that I can only listen to it for the first time once,
Mm.
you know. Um but even then, like listening to it live and in person, that would be so much more special of an experience. You can only
Yeah.
get those glimmers, you know,
Yeah,
the
absolutely. And
shadows.
and like I think it's interesting because Newman obviously writes here about the I'm not going to say perfection, right? Because nothing is ever perfect, as we know.
Right, right.
But the as close to perfect as you can get kind of music where all the harmonies are very aligned and everything tunes really well. And of course, as musicians, we're like used to thinking about these details. We know what makes a performance really, really good, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but I suppose when you are streaming something or you're recording something for digital release, right? You can put a lot of time and effort into making it musically perfect, because you know what that sounds like. And if you are
Yes.
playing through a section and you mess something up, you could just record it again and splice that in with the recording, and you can
Yeah.
compile these little bits and pieces of what is on paper perfect music. And yet, I would argue that there's something more perfect about the experience of imperfect live
Mhm.
music, because
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I really don't think, again, that really profound human connection that happens between two people can
Yeah.
be replicated digitally. It just can't. And I'm not saying,
Yeah.
like that, I also am really appreciative of how accessible music is now. It makes my workday so much more bearable. Um, like, I love it. I'm constantly like streaming music and listening to music, but nothing for me will ever come close to that feeling of live performance and what that means for interacting with the image of God in another person in that very profound way that you can only do in performance, in live performance.
Mhm. Mhm. For sure. Absolutely. It reminds like talking about all of this is reminding me of a conversation I had with a friend of mine back in college. She went to a different school for music, but we were really good friends in high school. And I remember us talking about audition recordings for summer festivals, um, and how we were noticing that audition committees were increasingly asking for video recordings because too many people were splicing audio together to make a perfect recording. And so you had these technically perfect recordings that were absolutely soulless. And they didn't want that. They, like, the audition committees actually wanted the live video recordings that they could see that you were not splicing it together. And they wanted to they wanted the imperfections, you know? They wanted to see what you were like as a player and not like because you like we're not robots, you
Mm-hmm.
know? So I think there was a lot of wisdom in that collective shift to video recordings, even though I personally found it more of a pain in the butt to do video recordings than audio recordings. Audio recordings were so much easier to do because I didn't have to dress up for the audio recordings, you know?
Mm-hmm.
um, and there's just a whole extra layer of, you know, when you're doing or video recordings that is just with the whole visual component, it just makes it more complicated. But, I remember being annoyed with it, like understanding the reasoning, but being annoyed with it. But now looking back on it, I'm grateful that these committees largely shifted over to doing video recordings. Um, because that imperfection and not being able to play something robotically is we need that in music. Like we need to keep that there because we are human. We're going to make mistakes. We're not going to be perfect, like perfectly play everything all the time, and that is okay, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um and when we accept that, it actually allows us first, I think mostly to make less mistakes because we're not so hard on ourselves in the moment and
Yeah.
worried in the moment. Um But it also allows for joy and surprise and different human emotions to shine through a lot better, um, than when we are striving to be technically perfect.
Mm-hmm.
The world is not better with more robots. Like humans, that's where it's at, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Technical perfection does not make the world a better place. Human
Mm-mm.
connection makes the world a better place.
Precisely. Precisely.
I think what that really reminds me of as well is when John Henry Newman was made a bishop, he took for his motto this phrase, cor ad cor loquitur. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but it means heart speaks to heart.
I've heard that before. Oh, I love
Yeah.
that. Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think that is so exemplary of exactly what we're talking about. The human heart speaks to the human heart. And that's not a replaceable or fakeable interaction. That has to be real, that has to be raw. And I think that's exactly what you get in the beauty of live performance.
Oh, for sure. Man, that would be such a good mantra for musicians to remember and to pass on as well, like in, educational settings. Um, and to even just to write on your music, like before you go perform, like
Mm-hmm.
that could help change the whole atmosphere from like worrying about, am I going to play this well? Am I going to sing this well? To making it like prioritizing that human connection.
And I also think that phrase has the power as well to totally transform the way that we teach as musicians as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because how often in going into our own teaching, and this is, I will be the first to put my hand up and say this is a huge examination of conscience for me as well as a teacher. How often are we going into our lessons and we're more concerned about the musical result that we're getting from our students instead of touching their hearts and monitoring the posture of our own hearts as
Mm-hmm.
teachers? Because I'm sure, unfortunately, probably most of us have experienced really toxic teaching environments
Mm-hmm.
and know firsthand how incredibly damaging that is. And the reason that it's so damaging is because, as we discussed, music is an inherently kind of vulnerable sort of art. And when you are opening yourself up in a teaching capacity, you're putting yourself in a lesson knowing that you're going to make mistakes and that you are, you're nearly putting yourself on the chopping block, knowing
Yeah.
that you're going to be torn apart, at least, musically. That's kind of what you're there for. But if that's done in a way that's really unhealthy and really toxic, and it does not prioritize your own humanity first and foremost, that is so incredibly damaging because it's a betrayal of the heart, And
Oh,
so,
for sure. Yeah.
I actually think this phrase "cor ad cor loquitur" um, can be transformative for our entire musicianship if we really take it on and learn kind of what it means for each of us and the role that music plays in each of our lives, whether that is performing or teaching or music therapy or something else. I think in every sort of interaction that we have with music and other people, or even with ourselves, like making sure that the posturing and communication of our heart comes first, it'll
Yeah.
transform everything.
Amen. Amen. And when we do that, just to wrap this up, but and to end on this kind of note, just when we do that, we get to be Christ to others and see Christ in others. And at the end of the day, that is the most important thing that we can do in this world, is to be Christ to others, which involves, in order to be Christ to others, we need to have a good relationship with him. And when I say good, I mean, regularly praying and checking and, like that's that sort of stuff. Not that everything is smooth sailing per se, but to have a relationship with Christ, and that allows us to be Christ to others and to see Christ in others, and like that's what we're called to do. It goes back to the two greatest commandments, right? You should love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and mind and strength. I think it is, or something to that effect. And then you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's what it all comes down to. And we as musicians are not exempt from this, and we need to bring it into our own music making and our own teaching and whatever we engage in with music. So
Absolutely. And just before we wrap up, I wanted to say as well, John Henry Newman is known as a writer, right? He has all of these very profound, very prolific writings, as you can tell from the sermon excerpt that I read. But I highly, highly encourage you to go listen to some of his texts that have been sent to music.
Yes, we did
Because,
one today at my church.
yeah, there are so many amazing musical settings of his texts, various texts of his. I'll shout out a couple of them. Probably the most famous is Lead Kindly Light.
That's the one we did.
Yep. Great settings of that. There's one that actually, I think it was written for my parish in Dublin, by Steve Warner. That's a choral setting. That's actually, I really like it. I think it's really fun. But he also has other very equally beautiful, profound texts that have been sent to music. So I'm going to shout out a couple more. Praise to the Holiest in the Height. That's another great one.
Okay.
Another bop. One that we sang today at my church, May the Lord Support Us. And amen to that.
Yes.
And then actually, his motto that we've just been talking about, Cor Loquitur, was actually set to music as well. But it was translated to English, so it's called Heart Speaks to Heart. There is a version, it might be the only musical version. I'm not exactly sure if anybody else has done this, but there's an Irish choral composer named Ephraim Feely, who again put this text to music for my parish here in Dublin. We have great choirs. We have a great choral program led by a friend of mine. Yeah. So we do a lot of Newman's text because it is his church.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense.
Yeah. So I would definitely recommend, because his poetic verses are equally as profound as his theological sermons and academic writings. So
yeah.
I
knew he was a poet more than he was a musician. Because obviously, everyone who knows St. John Henry Newman knows that he was a writer, but I knew about his poems, but had no idea about the music until when I mentioned to my husband that we were going to be recording about St. John Henry Newman. He was like, oh yeah. And just went on and on and on about all the poems that have been sent to music and how we did at church today. And I was like, what? I had no idea, So yeah, we'll link to some of those in the show notes so that you guys can listen as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And on that note, Tara, what have you been listening to this week?
Okay, well, I feel like the pattern for me is becoming a little bit obvious. I listen to a lot of choral music. I'm in, for context, I guess I would call it a semi-professional choir. We're a mix of professionals and non-professionals, but all very highly trained. We sing a lot of repertoire, some quite difficult, and we do a lot of concerts. We do a lot of competitions. So choral music is the soundtrack to my life during this time when the choir is rehearsing, because it's just constant that I'm learning new pieces, working on new pieces, having to review old pieces. And so I try to mix it up a little bit and listen to new choral composers or new choral works that I haven't heard before, that I'm not familiar with, just to sometimes give my brain a bit of a break from the repertoire that we're working so hard on at the moment. So this week, I discovered this new choral composer who I had never heard of before. His name is Stefan Klaverdal. I hope I'm saying that right.
Yeah, I've never heard of him.
And I have become kind of obsessed with his music. So it's the settings of many of his works are either text directly from or inspired by the Bible. And he is so clever in his setting of text. It blows my mind. So I have been listening to a lot of his works the past couple of days, particularly. And I have become enthralled with this one particular piece of his. It is called "Sea Darkness Covers the Earth." Okay.
Ooh,
and it is a piece for choir and cello, which I love.
Cool.
And yeah,
wonderful combination.
Absolutely. And so the actual original title of it references the book of Revelation. And I'm not going to go into all the details of it. It's on his website, the full kind of background of this piece. But what he did is he actually took a couple of different biblical texts, including that one from Revelation, and he kind of laced them together to create his own text for this piece of music. So I'm just going to read to you. It's not long. I'm just going to read to you the words of this because it's really interesting. So the song opens with the text, "See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the people." And that is from the book of Ezra, I think. And then it goes on, "Yet I am not silenced by the darkness, by the thick darkness that covers my face." That is from the book of Job.
Oh, okay.
And he goes on then to conclude the piece with, "The people living in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned." And that's from the book of Matthew. So it ends on this very beautiful, hopeful note. And I love it because it's inspired by the book of Revelation. And sometimes, at least for me, I can think of the book of Revelation as being quite heavy, quite dark, quite dismal in some ways, very Dies Irae, very Day of Judgment, very kind of scary. Yeah. I love that he takes us on this journey, starting in Revelation, in darkness and heaviness, and then takes us through this path of hopefulness to then ending with the light of Christ. It's so cool. It's so beautiful. Definitely listen to it.
I love that. I love how he's weaving scripture together too, because I mean, it can be very easy to pick and choose bits and pieces of scripture, but we're meant to read it as a whole. And I love that he's doing that with his composing. For me, so I'm resisting the urge to listen to Christmas music because it is now November and that means the holidays are practically upon us, but they are not here yet. And I'm resisting. I might break out the Nutcracker because I don't quite count that in, but it feels like holiday enough. That being said, I threw on the other day, I forgot Spotify has day lists. Are you familiar with this at all? Because I know you don't have Spotify.
No.
Okay. Spotify has this thing called day lists. And basically what it is it takes what you normally listen to on this day at this time and makes you a playlist that they think you will like. Sometimes they're off. Sometimes it's great. They gave me the other day a wonderful playlist full of all kinds of lush orchestral music. Among them was some Gershwin, and I have not listened to Gershwin in a long time. So it started out with Rhapsody in Blue, which I love, love, love. But then later on it went to American in Paris, and I haven't listened. I've listened to Rhapsody in Blue fairly recent. I mean, not fairly recently, but within the last 5 years. I've listened to it many times, just not in the last year or so. American in Paris, I don't know when the last time I've listened to that is. I played a band transcription of it my senior year in high school, but since then, I don't know. I forget American in Paris for some reason. I don't know why that is. So it was super fun to revisit that. I love that piece. It is so fun. It is so jazzy. I love a good Gershwin orchestral piece. It's just wonderful. So that's what I was listening to. This week was a bit of Gershwin, and now I will be continuing to try to resist the holiday music, and we'll see what happens. We'll check back in on that next week and see if I have caved or if I have continued to resist. And on that note, we will wrap up and say goodbye. Thank you so much for tuning in to the podcast. No other prayers for you, and we'll see you next time. God bless.
God bless. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Little Sparks podcast. For more information on this podcast and our ministry, please visit www.thehildegardcollective.com.